just a little bit of context. So can you share the path that led you into restaurant operations?
Yeah, absolutely. This goes back to 20, I was going to say 2010, but you know what? I think it really is the tail end of 2008, 2009. And this is a phase in my non-restaurant career. I was a management consultant. So one of those people living out of suitcase 4 days out a week, traveling on projects. And one of the benefits and perks of traveling, being a traveling consultant and working 10, 12 hours a day is you get a per diem, and then you get to go to nice restaurants, use that per diem, and then you can level up with your own money to make it all work. And that's probably when I would say like my actual consumer, my guest dining experience started to come to life. What is it like to go to a great restaurant? And a great restaurant doesn't mean awards all the time. It can be just like a restaurant that really cares about what they're putting on the table, how they're treating you. My experience began in going to restaurants. I was a patron, and a patron of some pretty good restaurants. One in particular was 2 blocks from my house, a restaurant called Craigie on Main. The chef owner was Tony Moss, and Craigie on Main was a French elevated restaurant, and a James Beard winner. The cool thing was I was there when they were getting to that level. And so I was part of the guest experience that they were, doling out day after day, night after night. And I was kind of like there when not traveling 3 nights a week. I was not married. Girlfriend lived in New York, going to law school. So, I kind of was just like out and about.
Yeah, for sure.
And then what I learned is when you actually become a guest at a restaurant like that has that type of care about how it treats guests, what they're trying to do, and they really kind of bring you in as family. At least that's how I felt. And I would say, hey, something's different about this dish, because I had it a lot. And they would be like, Ming says something's wrong with the dish, chef. And then chef would come out and be like, hey, what's different? What's going on here? And, they could have just been like, something, just forget about that guy. But this type of restaurant was the type of restaurant that really cared about my guest experience. And I like to say I became enamored with the restaurant industry because of having an experience like that. And for me to give back, honestly, in a lot of ways, was something that was top of mind for me. And sort of like, hey, how can I give back to this industry that's given me all these like great experiences, being at the bar, hanging out with the bartenders, telling stories, getting recommendations to go to other bars in other cities that I was traveling to, and also getting great experiences there. The late Murray Stenson, I hung out at his bar back in the day at Zigzag Cafe, a lot because a lot of bartenders knew who Murray was. And then Murray gave me great experience in front row seat at his bar, and I would take that and go to Death and Company in New York and get a great experience there. And it was like this really cool industry experience. And I wanted to give back to it. And so I said, hey, best way to do that is to invest in a restaurant, help out somebody, get their business off the ground in Cambridge, where I lived. And turns out someone took up that advice and gave me a call, and that sort of started the process of starting my own restaurant. Actually, it was just being really into the industry, being a guest and a patron, that got me started.
Well, and talk to me about the realities of that. I think every entrepreneurial journey, especially in our industry, starts with, it's going to be great. I see everybody doing it. How hard could it possibly be? And so I would ask you, like, theory into practical application. What were you blindsided by? What surprised you when you actually dug in?
Yeah. So look, it's like I was not an industry person. I didn't grow up in the restaurant industry serving bussing tables. That's not my background. I came into it with, hey, I know my way around a spreadsheet. I understand how to raise money, how to work with lawyers here and there. And so I kind of came to the table with, I think, the pieces that you need outside of the table experience. And my partners, who I met along the way, had that in spades, had worked in a long time. And so what I think really took me by surprise was there are a lot of the restaurant success, or I should say, not even success, but like its story is written by its physicality. Like a restaurant is a place you go to. And when you go to a restaurant, like the bar is on one side of the restaurant. It doesn't just all of a sudden show up on the other side of the restaurant one day, right? It's there, and it's in the ground. And so a lot of building a restaurant, especially when you are building something from an old building like we were from the 1910s, built by actually a bakery in around the early 1900s called the Puritan Cake Company. That's why my restaurant's called Puritan and Company. Learned that by going to the Historical Society and learning about the history of the building. But a lot of it has to do with physicality. And like once you just make a decision about something physical, where the gas lines are, where the bar sink are, etc., those kind of decisions are permanent, and they're really expensive when you make mistakes. So I would say getting off the ground early on is planning. It's the Eisenhower, right, quote, right? Planning is everything. No, is it Churchill? One of those guys. Planning is everything. Plans are worthless. It's really true when it comes to like building an actual restaurant, and that's where the expensive mistakes are often found.
So it's my thesis is that great restaurants have great food, great beverage, and great service. And those restaurants, more often than not, when you look at the statistics, go out of business as often as terrible restaurants. And so everything that you're talking about is what I think ultimately differentiates a restaurant that succeeds from a restaurant that fails. Because great food, great beverage, great service, those are table stakes at this point. And those are, in my opinion, easily replicatable features. Whereas being conservatively or fiscally conservative, using long term planning, understanding like layout and what the build out of a restaurant needs to look like. These are the things that are lacking in the industry, especially as it relates to independent restaurants. So you weren't born with that knowledge, and you certainly didn't collect that knowledge by working in the industry for decades. So how did you go about cobbling together the essential parts, the essential information that you needed to turn a successful brand into a successful business?
Yeah, I would say I'm going to say a few things, but let me start with the last thing that I would say is it's luck.
Sure.
You need luck. I think we all know that
Yes.
in this industry. You kind of got to get lucky. The things that we had early on were constraints. Constraints are really powerful. When you only have so much money to spend, otherwise it means that you don't get to pay your mortgage the next month, then it really helps you focus and leads a lot of restaurant operators towards determination. You'll probably never meet a harder working set of people coming from all backgrounds, because you kind of have to get it done. Otherwise you close, and then you're out of business, and then you don't have a job, and then your team doesn't have a job. So in the early days of starting a restaurant, especially when you have the opportunity to kind of build something, the constraints are really important. Sticking to a budget, sticking to a timeline. None of those were met on my first project.
Sure.
Actually, none of those were met on any of my projects.
Yeah, amen.
It's just a matter of how far off you are.
Sure.
And we learned a lot on the first. In fact, we have 8 concepts now, but we didn't get to 2 until 7 plus 7.5 years into the business. And so take that first one and you learn a lot along the way. Concretely, I think restaurants, fail even when they have good service, even when they have good hospitality, even when they have good food, good drink, good bar programs. It comes down to spending too much money on the build out, and then having too much high fixed costs, which is their rent and the occupancy. And those two things are a little counterintuitive, because restaurant operators often think, well, I need the best location, so I got to pay the highest dollar per square foot. And they end up in a bad lease, in a situation where it doesn't make fiscal sense because things turn, things change, but that number's still the same. It's not like it goes down, right?
Sure.
And then ultimately the build out where it's like, well, I need to have all these fancy chairs and tables and lighting. Oh my God, you can spend so much money on lighting
Oh my God,
in a
so
restaurant.
much. For
And it
sure.
matters, by the way. Lighting does
It
matter.
does. I
People
think
want
it's
to have a good
huge.
experience, right?
Look, I
But
came out
sometimes
of
you don't need a
nightlife,
10,000.
so in nightlife, lighting and sound is everything. Every nightclub you go to is four walls and a gross floor. That's all it is. And sound and lighting, that's the key differentiator across the board.
That's right, exactly. And so, like, do you really need the $400 chair and you need 25 of them at your bar? Or, can you spend the $200 chair? So think small examples like that and thinking about ultimately you have to pay this back. You have to pay this down. Otherwise, there's nothing left for you, operator, is something that constantly you have to think about.
And then you go from one concept to multiple concepts. The exciting thing about it, it's like 1 to 2 is really hard, right? Because you see people go from 1 to 2, they open the second one, it's the Titanic, and not only does it go down, but it brings down the first one with it. But then you do 3 and 4, and again, I think it's a lot of luck and a lot of guessing. But I also think the more you do it, the luckier you get, and the better you get at guessing. As you guys begin to open more and more concepts, what were the common threads that you found as it related to success?
I think, well, one, I'll say we actually went not from 1 to 2, but actually one to 4. We opened a 3 concept building in 2020. So not a
Great
good year just to
timing.
open.
Bravo.
May 2020 was the open, and ultimately it became a staggered one. But we went from one independent restaurant, 80, 90 seats, PDR, bar, 8 services a week, dinner plus brunch, to all day service, breakfast, cafe, rooftop bar, fine dining Italian, ultimately an additional 3 more restaurants in a single 11,000 square foot building. So much larger project on scale. And I'd say the commonalities of those projects were we were in the same city. So we kind of knew all the same people as far as inspectors and like city officials, etc. So we kind of knew the cast of characters, but the project scale was very different. And it's kind of interesting. I have like a 30-page lease for my first restaurant, and I have a 190-page lease for my second restaurant. So it's very, very different arrangement.
Sure.
But I think the fundamentals were still mattered around budget, around focus on some elements, how you get it off the ground. And then you really just have to break the problems down into smaller ones, as in, well, what is this experience that we're trying to deliver in the cafe? How does it differ from the rooftop bar? And how do you ultimately convince the guest to move between those, right? Because that's the whole idea of what kind of experience we were building. My chef liked to call it a hotel without rooms. We have your quick grab and go coffee, and then you can stay and get the drink after work, or you can get the really fancy meal with the Italian restaurant that's making house-made pasta. And I think, true to the experience of strong bar program, great drink, great hospitality, ultimately good food, which we're always going to do, being chef driven, stayed the same. I think really just the scales and the dollars of the project were a lot different, which meant the mistakes were more expensive, more costly.
You hit a level of scale, Ming, where like you're not able to see everything all at once at the same time, which is problematic because, I think that modern restaurateurs today, there's not a visibility issue, there's a focus issue. You know what I mean? There are all of these different numbers being thrown at you. And when you're looking at 8 concepts, right? How have you figured out as a restaurateur how to look at like critical information and determine the overall health of your business. What are you looking at?
Great. I have multiple jobs, as you know, Josh, and I'm in this industry as a technology person, and then obviously as a general partner and an operator of a group. And I stay really close to the business in that I'm in I'm in the software suites because I'm remote and I'm not always physically in the business. I'm constantly on the business. We use that phrase, and I'm constantly looking at how are we doing with the budgets, because we do have budgets. We're that far along in our maturity as a group that we have budgets. We have to understand what our targets on a weekly basis. We understand what our labor targets are, revenue targets are. How are we tracking, in period to date? And so having a pulse of how we're progressing to our plan is super important. And honestly, we talk a decent amount. So I have 2 management meetings twice a week, one with partners and then one with our leadership team. And we go through all the things that are holding us back that we have to make decisions on. And ultimately, that's how we run the business week to week.
What numbers are you looking at? Like I'm assuming you open your phone and there's either an automated report or a report that your team provides that's giving you critical data, and it could have 50 numbers on it, but I'd be willing to bet it has like 5. What do you right?
Yeah,
What are
of
you
course.
tracking?
Look,
What
net sales,
like
right? Net sales is what we're always going to start with, right? Now we want to understand the quality of those sales as well, get next to, but I want to see year over year comparison. In the case of my quick service restaurants, I want to see week over week, month over month, because it just has a little bit more of a trend associated with month to month. And that top line number is super important. Then I want to see, are we hitting our prime costs, measurements within that. So, okay, what does my labor look like? What does my COGS look like with respect to that revenue? So was that a good week, or from a margin perspective? Or do we, obviously there's things that you have to calculate on a monthly basis, for all the operators on the call. You all know that we have to count to really actually know what we actually made. But, we really tried to estimate it with keeping a really good track of our purchasing. And that has to do with a lot of the process that we've built into managing the business with our beverage director, our director of operations. No invoice goes unscanned, as we like to say. And that feeds into the systems that we're going to be able to say, hey, based on this last week and our assumptions on how we're running hot on X, Y, Z, this is what we're going to come out on margin, EBITDA this week, and how we're targeting. And so those are the main things that we look into. There's some other metrics that we'll pay attention to, but less so, like sales per labor hour. We have different types of businesses. Some are just drastically more efficient than others. Full service is more efficient, at least in my world, my group. But those are pretty much the main metrics that we pay attention to. There are others that I would like to pay attention to with respect to guests, as in, tell me more about our guests this week, returning. Are they responding to our advertising, our marketing tools? So those are areas that I'm really excited for the business to become even more savvy about. Even I have areas to grow.
I love that. So we were introduced to each other through Square, which is
That's right.
a company you work for, which is so interesting because you could have done so many different things based on like your expertise and your specialization. But you decided to work with a company that works directly with the industry. And so what persuaded you to go there?
Yeah, absolutely. In the first 4 years of my restaurant career, so starting Puritan and Company in 2012, semi-finalist, James Beard, and Best New Restaurant, top of the world, and really learning, like what is next for me? Is it starting next restaurants? Is it, just focused on this one alone, going back to consulting? It was a little bit of a career moment for me, trying to figure out what do I want to do next. I think it's obvious for the audience. It's like, hey, probably not going to you know, become rock star rich as a restaurant operator. It can happen for some people, but it's not really the reason why we get into the business or the normal outcome. But I had a tech background. I came to the Boston area for college. Way back, I went to MIT, and we build technology. We're people who try to solve problems at scale. And so for me, getting into the restaurant technology industry was a natural step for me. It's like, okay, I'm already tinkering with my Aloha system and et cetera. And, that's what we opened with, almost 14 years ago. How do I make this better? How do I build something that works for my restaurant? Also could work for other restaurants.
Sure.
So I started building software for restaurants because, that was the way for me to say, hey, I think I have something that I figured out here in mine. I think I can make a business out of solving those problems elsewhere. And I continued to pull on that thread for basically the next 12 years of my career, which has led me now leading all of food and beverage technology at Square.
What an amazing opportunity. And the reason I bring it up is less from like a technological perspective, but definitely as a restaurateur, right? The fact that you get to scratch your own itch, the fact that you actually get the opportunity to build the solutions that you desire to see in this world. It's, I think every tech company servicing the industry, right, needs to have like a resident restaurateur, right? You've got to be close to the problem you're trying to solve. You have to have this intimate understanding of the problem. And so when you took the role on, what were the bleeding neck problems you wanted to solve for?
Yeah, good question. And I've been building software for restaurants, like I said, for some time. And I've done it in multiple places, in a different point of sale system prior to Square and now at Square. In taking the role at Square, I got the opportunity to really think about everything. And so I'm really lucky to have this opportunity and being the food and beverage product lead. I can oversee the whole aspects of the business and really advocate for that software to be built a very specific way for the food and beverage operator. And that is ones that are just starting out. Maybe you've got a food truck, or you are a 200 unit chain, trying to hit scale, at your next level of scale. Those all fit within my purview. And so I look at it as a way that I can help restaurants in so many in the industry from my position, and I can bring real operator experience to the table. And that's not just like, oh, well, every restaurant in Square is going to run the way that Ming runs his restaurant. It's more about being able to speak to the industry and be with them as opposed to, selling to them, right?
Sure.
Ultimately, I do sell a product. But when I think about partnership with the brands that I have had the opportunity to talk with, and I've talked with hundreds and hundreds of operators, we talk about their problems. We talk about their issues. I'm not selling on day one, so, day two. I'm really trying to understand their businesses better. And when you can speak the same language as an operator, you can relate to them with their real problems. One, they trust you. That's important. We're an industry that's very, close knit. We don't want everybody in our industry.
Amen.
And we have walls up, and that means that means to the tech industry as well. But when you have operators who are now trying to build products and capabilities for us, that changes the conversation with those operators. And they really let you into their world, and then you can then actually solve their problems at their core. And that's what I've been doing now almost 3 years at Square.
Did that exposure change the way you see your own restaurants? Because I can tell you, like, I had the sample size of my restaurants and three concepts, right, across multiple tiers of dining. And I think I was good, man. I think I was like really good, right? But I think like what makes you great is like the iteration that happens through testing across hundreds or thousands of restaurants. because then you have a sample size large enough that you're able to see like what would positively impact across multiple tiers of dining. And it's also you're able to see common problems, which ultimately create common solutions. So, how did your worldview change when you assumed the role?
So I think a great question, and I'll answer it with that. I'm a curious learner. I do not think I know everything. I think what I do have is access to an amazing R&D organization, right? We have thousands of people here who work at Square, and they can build pretty much anything, like literally anything. And so what I am out to do is to learn from operators. And when you start talking to ones that have built really strong restaurants that have been around either long time, staying power, accolades at the highest level, Michelin, James Beard, multiple units have built profitable concepts at scale, and you start triangulating the information about how they operate, how they make decisions. They're not like trade secrets. They're really about like, hey, this is how the excellence in our industry is operated on, and how do you ultimately turn that into something that you can put into software that can help others? I think so many companies have sort of traded on we want to give everybody the enterprise capabilities that Starbucks and McDonald's have, and we want to give it to the independent. Well, that's still like just very true still. Like that's what technology does. It's a levels the playing field. But you know what? A lot of those people started in independence. Then they moved it into the bigs, and sometimes they go back, right? Because they take what they've learned. And I've been trying to always just advance my learnings. And by the way, the industry doesn't stay stagnant. It changes.
Sure.
It's very different than it was 15 years ago. Most people were worried about their COGS 15 years ago. Now, obviously, labor is the most important thing in the prime cost sector. How do you retain your employees? How do you train your teams, right? Turnover has always been big, but it's been more impactful to the P&L than ever before. And so you see a lot of focus on very successful operators and groups and brands deploy technology very specifically around people. And so, look, my goal is where I sit in my role is to learn as much as I can from the best operators, learn the challenges from struggling operators, and produce products and capabilities that help these businesses grow and scale or survive.
And so, if you were to ask me after talking with thousands of restaurateurs, um, I think that the bleeding neck problem in our industry today is focus more than anything. It's that we're looking at symptoms instead of the root cause of the problems that we're facing in the industry. And a huge part of that, I think, is the availability of data, right? Not all data is useful. Not all data is going to lead you down the path that you need to fix the fundamental issues within your business. And so, as you're building out these solutions, which provide amazing visibility, like what guardrails do you put in place to make sure that they're seeing information that is relevant to the deepest needs of their business today?
Yeah, well, I think I answer this question consistently. And I think that means that I think I'm coming at it from the right angle, from principle aid. And that is, products and tools, even the ones that my company offers, and there are many of them, like over 30 of them, they're all great in their own right. But you have to have a problem to solve. Otherwise, then you don't need XYZ tool. Really start from the core root cause of why is my business not growing, right? Why is this part of the menu suffering? Why are my employees not sticking around after month 7? You really have to have those key questions figured out, as opposed to here's a solution that so-and-so is using down the block. Let me just use it and see what happens. There's no panaceas in our business. You really have to think about the problem and then break it down. And so, yes, you're right. Focus. is something that I constantly pledge to businesses. Um, the issue is that, though, you might have actually many problems um, in the restaurant business, and
Sure,
you have to figure them all out.
absolutely. They're
And
like
they all
problem machines. It's like
exactly.
whack-a-mole, Ming. Like you hit one, you knock it out, and then another one pops up.
That's exactly right. And so you have to kind of decide, like, well, I think I'm gonna like three-quarter finish this one and then move to the next one. It's a bit of, it's like you got a hot grill. You gotta keep moving. Um, and and so focus doesn't mean like, oh, pick one thing. You
Sure.
might think that might be the right thing, but our business is one where everything has to come together for it to be great. Whether it's the recipe of the drink, it's the experience of inside the four walls, or even like the more complexity that the industry is seeing with delivery, right? You got to be in the takeout delivery business these days, whether you like it or not. And you really have to like think a lot of those things through and make sure you're not doing them all poorly. Start with making sure that they're not bleeding you out, and then go after like improving them and getting them to great.
As it relates to worldview, so Square serves many verticals, right? And I think one of the
Yes.
things that made me a better restaurateur was like no longer believing the fallacy that the restaurant industry is a unicorn, right? That the rules of traditional business don't apply in restaurants. I will say that restaurants are uniquely difficult in the way that most low margin businesses are high volume, right? People make 5%, but they make 5% on a billion, not on a million. And so that is unique in and of itself. But one of the things at your disposal, I think, is the ability to be influenced by what's working in other industries and apply those learnings to the restaurant industry. Has that impacted your worldview at all since moving to Square?
Yeah, absolutely. And for the record, like the food and beverage business is like a third of Square's business, and it serves the retail vertical. It serves health and beauty, fitness, as well as services. Kind of like every hourly and local business out there can be served by software in Square. And I think that in this day and age, restaurants have to bring in dollars from different places more than ever. You can't just live off your four walls. I mean, some places can, but for the most of us, probably not. You have to have your on-prem game in a much better way. And pizza's been doing that forever, right? But you have to adopt it. But now also you have to be good at potentially selling merchandise or events, different ways that you're booking revenue, where it's kind of like a BEO, but like you're doing it on an individual basis, and you're continually bringing something new to the table there. Um, Even subscription, right? Taking a page out of entertainment, or retail, in the sense that you got the coffee club, you got the pizza club, XYZ, you name it, you make it up. Subscription revenue is now something that can help your business, and also it's not something that is that far out of reach, right? Square can help you build that pretty quickly, because we help you with your guest data, all your information, who you're reaching, and we can help you build those programs right out of the box. And those were largely retail, kind of centric tools. But now you can bring those over to the food and beverage industry with the snap of a finger.
You look at Square as a point of sale, and I just don't know if point of sale really does these platforms justice anymore, because it's not that. It's like a full scale operating system, And so, which is exciting, but I think that the biggest hurdle in our industry isn't knowledge or a lack of tools, it's overwhelm, right? And then probably leads to an underutilization of the tools that we have. I think the only thing worse than not having a tool is not using that tool. And so when you look at the functionality that Square has within the restaurant vertical, where do you see its strongest use cases to turn around or to scale up businesses?
Yeah, a great question, and ones that customers ask us all the time. Because we have a lot of businesses that are starting out from the
Sure.
beginnings, on their way to growing super rapidly, turning into larger ones, and then franchising. We've seen that story happen on our platform. The kebab shop out of the San Diego area, then moving into then Texas, Arizona, Florida is actually one of those great stories.
For sure.
And then talking to that ownership team, they've used almost every aspect of Square, and it kind of built along the way. And I think one of the things that restaurants, when they think about the point of sale, they think of the basics like, hey, I need something to like take the transaction, right? Right. To
Right.
make the sale. In this day and age, that means credit cards, debit cards, Apple Pay. You need something to take the sale, right? But then you need something to help you make the food, right? And, like a lot of people are still on paper tickets, but sometimes high volume businesses require kitchen display systems, kitchen display screens, right? A lot more efficiency out of your back of house when when you use digital screens. They're in every single one of these large chains out there for a reason. And look, velocity and high volume is super important, but so is accuracy, right? In this day and age with allergies and all kinds of things, making sure you get the order right comes from the back being on point. And so those are the table stakes. I think when operators get maybe a little bit excited, sometimes maybe they jump a little too quick is, okay, now how do I build my loyalty program? How do I get my things on my website? How do I start selling online? You can do all of that on Square. And the question is like, what is the right sequence for you to do that? A lot of people want to just get out the gate and do everything on day one. Hey, more power to you, especially if you had some experience doing that elsewhere. But I think what Square is unique in doing, it's like it's all connected in one place. And so, if you want to build those relationships, offer that loyalty program, you turn it on in the platform, and we've made it actually more affordable than ever to actually do this with our new plans. And what's great about it is it's not like you have to sign up for something else, right? You can actually just try it out yourself. See if you like it, tweak it, make it your own, brand it your own. And then ultimately, if you like it, then you can just kind of put the gas pedal down on it. And then you start building, okay, now that I have a large customer base, a database, what can I do more with that? You can do some of the things I was talking about earlier, which is, okay, now I want to offer the subscription program, or I want to do the VIP program. All of a sudden you have all these options now to engage guests, and you have all this data, Josh, that you were talking about earlier. Well, I really want to cater to the red wine drinkers drinking the Italian wine, and because I've got something new I'm adding to my list. Well, that's a thing that you can figure out really quickly, especially with AI tools. And then before you know it, you have a way to engage with your guests faster than ever, more targeted more than ever. And that makes those guests feel special.
Not everybody listening is ready to buy a point of sale system. I look back on, the point of sale system that we bought for that fine dining restaurant. And dude, I spent like $26,000 on that thing, right? It was a tower computer, getting dust. It was a whole situation. And so I think a lot of people find themselves in like one of two places. Like their point of sale is about to die. So they're just going to have to get something new. And then there are people that have point of sales currently that don't have the capabilities of modern point of sale systems. And so maybe they're looking to make the jump, thinking that, getting an up to date point of sale could potentially be a strategic advantage. It could potentially help them make more off of more people or make more off the same people that are currently patronizing the concepts. And if that's the case, um, using like your restaurateur hat, uh, what do you think people should be looking for in a modern point of sale system? Like, what are the non negotiables?
Ooh, wow. Really good question. Um, I think one of the things that matters when buying a point of sale, uh, is that it can run your business with like as much as your business as possible. I know, like, I've heard other operators, certainly in my past, talk about how, well, I don't want all my eggs in one basket. I like to spread it around, et cetera. Especially when it comes into payment processing versus the point of sale versus the kitchen versus this and that. And I think we actually, over the last decade and a half, and I've been a part of this. We got a little too, um, we too many products, too many integrations, too many pieces. But not because I don't believe in there should be innovation and we should be building better, better and better products and having an open platform like Square does with APIs, all that good stuff. But I think operators sort of lost focus on, how do I make this all work when the business might change? So when you're designing for your business today, you might operate it one way, but if you have a growth plan and you're like, hey, well, I'm going to have a patio, in 6 months, right? Well, then you need to think about buying the point of sale that has handhelds that can work wirelessly, right? So you can make sure you're still turning those tables quickly at the patio. So you can't not just think about today. You have to think about your business over the full 12 months, even maybe in a couple of years of how you're thinking about expansion. I think also about modern point of sale is you have to, think about this data influx of richness that you're about to get, because your point of sale can tell you all about your guests, all about your tables, all about your employees. But if you're not ready to maybe unlock it, make sure that the platform like Square or others, are going to help you get the most out of it, right? And then you learn along the way. You don't expect you to just install it and just make it work. You want to get the training. You want to get the learnings. You want to find out, I think it's maybe cliche, but I'll say you're kind of partnering with this technology because it's going to be helping you run parts of your business that there's no other way to run it. Like you need technology. Otherwise you won't be able to cater, right? I mean, you can. I guess you can take phone calls and take credit cards over the phone, but it's kind of like the old way of doing things, and that can lead to all kinds of other issues. So you have to kind of decide that this is my partner we're going to work with, and I'm going to go all in, and it's going to evolve with me and grow around me. And that's what I like about being in the position at Square, because that's the pledge that I'm making to my customers, is that you're just not getting one thing that you buy today. You're getting actually something that's going to be with you for the long run.
As I was preparing for the conversation, there was this thought that struck me, which is find me two more ruthlessly competitive industries than software and hospitality. And I think that the winner in both, it's the person that can anticipate the needs of their customer best looking forward, right? And so I know that you are servicing restaurants today, but I also know you are very much focused on what restaurants are going to need a year from now, 10 years from now. And so, what problems are you looking to solve for restaurants this year, this decade, that you think are on the horizon for the people listening?
Yeah. So I'll draw back on that same one I said earlier, which is I would like to ensure that my customers today that are using Square, and if you're not using Square yet, that you can get the absolute most out of the platform because it offers a lot. And for you to maximize its value, especially for the packages that we offer, like there are things that you can do that you don't necessarily need to go out, get another piece of software for. In some cases there might be, but really one way to make it just easier for you to go from here, I have this problem or this, I want to grow my business. And not only, it's not one product that solves it for you. It's actually these three and how they connect together that ultimately help you grow the business another 2, 3, 4% same store sales. And that connection of all them together. And honestly, the power of AI is going to actually really accelerate this for operators. It's not It's not fake news. It's real. And operators, I think, should embrace it. It's almost like having guy, we always have we all have a guy who's going to help us with something, whether it's plumbing, it's electrical, so it's a vendor of some type, but like AI is your guy who's going to help you ultimately understand your business better, and we've got a really good one. um you know and so that's my focus for this year is let's create tons of value for restaurants where they don't have to spend any more money. They need to just get more out of what they have. In the case of Square, sometimes you can save more, you can save money. And in the future, beyond that, it is helping those businesses future-proof their businesses or operations to some extent. It doesn't mean like you won't have to do anything, but let's help you evolve. Let's help you get to the next big wave that comes. I'll jump ahead on agentic commerce, for instance, where everyone's using, the consumers, are using like AI agents in order to buy food, right? They're not going to websites anymore. Are you well positioned as a business to tap into that? Well, yeah, absolutely. Square's at the forefront of that. We're doing that within our e-commerce teams. And so your menus are fully enriched and capable of reaching as many guests as possible. And so you don't have to do that. You don't have to figure that out. We're going to take care of that for you. But we still want to make sure we're core to our fundamentals around taking orders, making the kitchen work well, making sure your employees are paid on time. And so that core never goes away from our focus at Square for food and bev.
What should we steal from you? I mean, you're a successful multi-concept owner operator who is deeply entrenched in the industry, came from as an outsider, right? And managed to come in and outperform. I mean, even like when you look at accolades, right? You've done a really great job as a restaurateur, and then also you've done well on the technology side. And what you're building with Square is super exciting. And if we can agree that there probably aren't successful people, there are successful practices that, when done consistently, create a positive result. What should we steal from you? What are the tactics, tools, and strategies that have helped you become successful professionally that the people listening, and myself included, could internalize to become more successful?
Wow, that's a good one. Oh, I think I have like two, but I'll go with one that's a little philosophical in the sense of like do the right thing, like be good to people. It's a people business, whether it's other operators, it's your vendors. Um, it's a small world, and being good to people in general is something I think we all should do. I know that's a little bit soft, but like, in this business, yes, the margins are tight and sometimes it's zero sum, especially with your vendors and your landlords. But I would say, go above board and have respect, and hold people to that respect as well. I think maybe the other steal or the takeaway is I didn't get here, by myself, so I steal from others, learn from others. I had to basically ramp up really quick. Otherwise, I was going to lose all my money in my first restaurant. And so you have to talk to operators, as many as you can, talk to other industry experts as many as you can, make some decisions for yourselves based on what you think is right for your business. But don't think that you're on your own. It's not like maybe some of your former guests, are easily reachable. I can't really call up, some Michelin star operators on a moment's notice. But look, the local pizza shop that's been there for 30 years, they're probably doing something right. And maybe you can bring something to them that they don't know about, and they can share something with you. I think the community of restaurants is understated when it comes to how can we learn and share with each other. And so I would steal that.